Good afternoon, everyone. I am pleased to call the Subcommittee on Clean Air, Climate, and Nuclear Safety to order for a legislative hearing on the Crypto Asset Environmental Transparency Act, which I have introduced along with Senators Markey and Senator Sanders. And this is our first subcommittee hearing of the year. So Senator Rickards and I are going to begin, as they say in Casablanca, a beautiful relationship over the next 2 years. And we're looking forward, of course, to working with Senator Copper and Senator Capito as well. And we are looking forward to partnering with them and their extremely helpful staff. And over the course of the next few years, there will be many important issues that we will be asked to consider. So we welcome our witnesses. We appreciate your willingness to appear today. So today is going to be the first Senate hearing ever held on the environmental impacts of crypto mining. They may be mining digital assets, but their activities have real-world consequences. This is an emergency and urgent issue, and Congress needs to be proactive and reactive in tackling it. The market size of the global crypto mining industry was estimated at $2 billion in 2022, more than one-third of which is in the United States. That industry is forecast to nearly quadruple over the next 10 years, which means its threats to our environment, health, communities, and climate are set to explode. Bitcoin mining consumes as much power globally each year as the entire Swedish economy. In the United States, carbon dioxide emissions from Bitcoin mining are equivalent to the annual emissions from as many as 7.5 million gasoline-powered cars. Right now, Bitcoin mining in the United States uses as much power as we need to light every single home in our country. And that demand on our grid is only going to grow. Now, that's an amazing number, that Bitcoin alone consumes as much electricity as every light on in our country every day. We face an urgent climate crisis, which the Biden administration has committed to addressing by reducing greenhouse gases by 50% by 2030. We know we need to tackle emissions from many different sectors of our economy, and I'm sure we'll have hearings on these sectors as well. But our first hearing is focusing on the crypto mining industry because it deserves the spotlight. It has grown explosively in the United States over the past 2 years. It is extremely energy intensive, and we've seen it harm the general public while enabling the creation of heavily concentrated wealth in our country. We are not here to debate the pros and cons economically of cryptocurrency. We're here to discuss what the impacts are environmentally in our society and what we can do to reduce its impact. As our expert witnesses will explain, Bitcoin was the first ever crypto asset, and it relies on a process known as proof-of-work mining. Crypto miners use large banks of computers that suck up huge amounts of energy to run computations and are awarded new Bitcoins as a result. Every 10 minutes, a miner will generate Bitcoins, a reward that are currently worth nearly $140,000. As the value of Bitcoin increases, there is more incentive to run more computers, consume more energy, and mine more Bitcoins. It's an energy arms race for the digital era. Bitcoin miners have already had a direct impact on our climate by bringing mothballed coal and gas-fired power plants back online to power their operations. But it's more than just climate issues. Mining equipment creates significant amounts of electronic waste. Mining requires huge amounts of water for cooling and power generation. And residents from across the country have provided me with testimony of devastating noise pollution from neighboring Bitcoin mining facilities. With an environmental impact like this, Bitcoin is more like digital coal than digital gold. The commodity is virtual, but the harm is tangible. While the Bitcoin mining industry claims that they can actually be a boon to the environment, saying that they can capture and burn vented methane to power their operations, or that they can actually improve grid stability, we don't have the transparency which we need to vet those arguments to see if that assertion is true. But we do have real-world examples of how the industry is already creating real consequences for communities. That's why we're here. The Crypto Asset Environmental Transparency Act would mandate a detailed EPA-led study of the environmental impacts of crypto mining. The act would also require crypto miners to report their carbon dioxide emissions under the EPA's greenhouse gas reporting program. The people who profit from Bitcoin mining can't be left to grade their own homework. A take-home exam that you grade yourself almost always gets an A. That's just human nature at work. We need someone to check that work, need independent, trustworthy, and accurate statistics so that that homework gets a grade that's independent. And I look forward to discussing how the study and reporting in my Crypto Asset Environmental Transparency Act can help inform Congress and the general public about these emerging issues. And all I can say is that I'm glad that we're going to be able to have an active subcommittee this year. I'm looking forward to partnering with the ranking member on the subcommittee, Senator Ricketts. And at this point, I'd love to recognize you for your opening statement.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this subcommittee, hearing. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be the ranking member on the subcommittee for clean air, climate, and nuclear safety. I look forward to working with you and the other members as well, both members of the side of the aisle on EPW. I understand that you had a very successful last year with a lot of bipartisan legislation coming out. I also want to welcome our witnesses that are joining us here today. I appreciate you all taking your time to be able to be here. Especially, I'd like to recognize Courtney Dentlinger, who made the trip from Nebraska to come and testify. She is currently, she works for Nebraska Public Power District. You may not know this, but Nebraska is one of the only, well, I think we're the only public power state left in the country, completely public power state, yeah. And during my tenure as governor, Ms. Dentlinger actually led our Department of Economic Development, and she was so good at her job that we actually won 2 Governor's Cups for the most economic development projects per capita of any state in the country, which not only was great for us back then, but she also knows a lot. She's an excellent choice to talk about how to market Nebraska both nationally and globally, as she helped us win those Governor's Cups and help develop job opportunities in Nebraska. So today we're here to discuss an emerging industry, crypto asset mining. And I'm particularly interested in this topic as to whether this industry could result in more economic development for the state of Nebraska and across the country. While crypto asset mining may be a relatively new topic for the Environment and Public Works Committee, it's actually not my first time interacting on this topic in the crypto economy. When I was governor, the Nebraska legislature passed and I signed the Nebraska Fiscal Innovation Act into law. This law provided an avenue for financial institutions to invest in our state and benefit from this emerging sector. According to CNBC, my home state of Nebraska was actually named the #1 state for developing the crypto economy in 2022. And I'm proud that new businesses and new job opportunities related to cryptocurrency industry have either located in Nebraska or are considering coming to our state. When businesses are looking for a place to open their doors, what they're looking for is a business-friendly environment, someplace that they're being welcome. They're looking for regions also that can help them keep their costs low. For crypto asset mining, a key variable in this, of course, as the chairman pointed out, is electricity. So a key variable in their operating costs. And that's one of the reasons that these businesses are choosing Nebraska. Our electricity rates are among the lowest in the nation. Nebraska's average price for electricity per kilowatt hour in 2022 was just 9.84 cents. In addition to favorable energy prices, the people of Nebraska know best how to succeed by getting government out of the way of business. That's one of the things I talked about business-friendly environment. So I am interested in hearing on this topic. If we're discussing today, would hear about how we're treating one industry, the crypto asset mining, differently from other electricity consumers. Crypto asset mining is hardly alone in being an industry relying on large data server banks. Finance, technology, government, academia, and many others use significant amounts of electricity to power their computing needs. We should be providing the tools for open competition in a free market and not allowing politicians or bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. to pick winners and losers. When the federal government targets an industry, it has costly consequences, especially for an industry just beginning its development. Overreaching laws and regulations can drive emerging technologies overseas, and that often goes to countries that have fewer environmental regulations than the United States, which means you're actually adding to greenhouse gas emissions. This also means that we're losing jobs here in America. I look forward to hearing our witnesses' testimonies to explore discussions and opportunities related to crypto asset mining. And with that, Mr. Chairman, again, pleasure to be serving with you.
Beautiful.
Yield back time to you.
Mutual. Feeling is mutual. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Ricketts. And now we're going to turn to our esteemed panel of witnesses, and we're going to hear them in order. First, we will hear from Rob Altenberg. Mr. Altenberg is the Senior Director for Energy and Climate at Citizens for Pennsylvania's Future. Before that, he worked for Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, studied law at Widener Commonwealth Law School, and he is also a combat engineer company in the United States Army Reserve. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Anna Kellis. Dr. Kellis is the representative from New York State Assembly's District 125. Her district covers Tompkins County, where she was born. She earned a dual bachelor's degree in biology and environmental studies at Binghamton University and a PhD in nutritional epidemiology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And finally, we're going to hear from Courtney Dentlinger. Ms. Dentlinger is the Vice President of Customer Service and External Affairs at Nebraska Public Power District. She's a native of Battle Creek, Nebraska. She earned a bachelor's degree in political science, international studies, and Spanish from Wayne State College, and a Juris Doctorate from George Washington University here in Washington, D.C., in addition to all of the very nice things that Senator Ricketts said about you. So we welcome all of you. Thank you for testifying, and we will then now, in order, recognize you for your opening statement. We'll begin with you, Mr. Altenberg.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Markey, Ranking Member Ricketts, for having me here today. Again, my name is Rob Altenberg. I'm the Senior Director of Energy and Climate at Citizens for Pennsylvania's Future. We're a membership-based nonprofit environmental advocacy organization. I've been working on energy and environmental issues for over 30 years, and I'm here today to share why I'm concerned about Bitcoin mining and other related proof-of-work cryptocurrencies. That requires a little bit of background. First, for all its high-tech image, Bitcoin is based on a simple idea that has been around since the 80s, and it's called a blockchain, and it's basically an accounting ledger where each page or block records Bitcoin transactions. Part of what keeps this ledger secure is that creating new blocks is very, very difficult. Finding or mining a new block is a guessing game where the odds of being correct are less than one chance in 100 billion trillion. Much, much lower odds than winning a lottery. And the odds get worse the more miners join the race. The winner, the first one to mine a valid block, is rewarded with newly mined Bitcoin, currently valued at over $140,000, with no prizes for second place. To be competitive, Bitcoin miners use racks of special purpose computers that make trillions of guesses, hundreds of trillions of guesses every second. Each of those computers uses more than 3 times the amount of energy as the average household, and a single miner might run tens of thousands of them 24/7. Altogether, Bitcoin consumes more energy, more electricity than 80% of our states and more than many entire countries. Bitcoin is wasteful by design, but this sort of waste just isn't necessary. Bitcoin's guessing game system called proof of work is essentially cryptocurrency version 1.0. But newer versions accomplish the same thing faster and cheaper. Ethereum, for example, recently converted to a newer proof-of-stake system, and it can do everything Bitcoin can do and more while using just a fraction of the energy. For now, though, Bitcoin's system is still dominant, and the enormous amount of energy it wastes must come from somewhere. In Pennsylvania, we are seeing that on the ground. In 2021, one company announced plans to purchase 3 waste coal-fired power plants and install up to 57,000 miners. They already have 2 of these plants in operation. Waste coal is a problematic fuel, to say the least. As the name implies, it has low energy value compared to ordinary coal, so plants need to burn even more to generate the same amount of electricity. In the process, they emit more ozone precursors, fine particulates, acid gases, heavy metals, and it's the second most carbon-intensive generation next to residual fuel oil. Then, just in January of last year, state inspectors found 10 megawatts worth of generation had literally been plugged into fracked gas wellheads, and they were using the gas to mine Bitcoin without obtaining any permits. This sort of mining is increasing, but without clear reporting requirements, it's impossible to know which or how many of Pennsylvania's thousands of fracked gas wells are being used in this way. Media reports and even permit applications are sporadic. And even where there are reports, miners may call themselves data centers and not mention Bitcoin at all. In addition to the problem from drilling and fracking, Bitcoin mining also causes noise pollution. The sound of these operations has been compared to the whine of a giant dentist drill or a jet engine that never stops, and in some cases it can be heard for over a mile away. More than just an annoying nuisance that lowers property values, persistent noise pollution has been shown to cause health problems for both people and wildlife. And it's not just burning fossil fuels directly that's the problem. In Pennsylvania, we're seeing Bitcoin operations at nuclear power plants. And the operators claim this is carbon-free energy, but that doesn't tell the whole story. We don't have a surplus of clean carbon-free energy on our grid. So when carbon-free energy is diverted from powering our grid to wasteful cryptocurrency, something has to make up the difference, and that is often fossil fuels. Bitcoin mining is bad for public health and the environment. It's bad for the power grid and our wallets as well. Miners claim that they can easily pause operations when the grid needs power, but that only happens when the electricity is worth more than the Bitcoins. Essentially, we're linking our electricity prices to the volatility of the Bitcoin market, and that is a terrible idea. Worse yet, by wasting the cheap electricity on Bitcoin mining, wholesale prices go up for everybody else. In short, Bitcoin mining is wasteful by design, and waste is never good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Altenberg. Dr. Kellis, you're up.
So wonderful to be here today. Thank you. So I write to voice my support for Senator Markey's Crypto Asset Environmental Transparency Act as the representative of the 125th New York Assembly District. The environmental and socioeconomic impacts of expanding proof-of-work-based cryptocurrency mining will continue to have devastating environmental and socioeconomic consequences. It is estimated that cryptocurrency mining facilities for the proof-of-work-based cryptocurrency Bitcoin use more energy than all the processing for Google, Amazon, and Facebook combined, more than all the data centers globally combined, and more energy than all the solar panels that exist globally. In fact, according to Digiconomist, one Bitcoin transaction requires approximately 880 kilowatt hours. This is equal to the energy needed to power the average US household for 1 month. Given that a cryptocurrency mining operation creates minimal jobs, for example, a large US operation of 100,000 ASIC processors employs 40 staff per shift, yet as of a year ago made $2 million per day. Profits for a cryptocurrency mining company are thus limited not by labor costs, but rather by the cost of electricity. As one of the solutions for cheap energy, cryptocurrency mining companies have worked to reopen retired fossil fuel power plants like the large-scale facility called Greenwich in Dresden, New York, on Seneca Lake. An environment with moderate temperatures, clean air, and abundant fresh free water for cooling have made New York an ideal location for cryptocurrency mining companies. In the Finger Lakes, Greenwich provides service directly to the cryptocurrency mining operation on their property, maximizing their state permit allowed GHG emissions and increasing local air pollution, including nitrogen oxide and sulfur dioxide. Due to the frequent replacement of cryptocurrency mining processors, the facility has also created a notable amount of electronic waste. Facilities like Greenwich also negatively impact aquatic life due to the large quantities of water withdrawn from freshwater bodies to cool the electrical generation systems and the large-scale computer processor rigs. Water is removed at temperatures of 40 to 50 degrees and released back at temperatures of up to 108 degrees, killing thousands of fish every year and increasing the risk of harmful algal bloom outbreaks that are toxic for both wildlife and humans. Gas-fueled power plants also affect the health and quality of life in surrounding neighborhoods. Emission of hazardous air pollutants are known to cause asthma, heart attacks, strokes, reproductive damage, and preterm birth. These public health impacts are most acutely felt in environmental justice communities. Noise pollution is another significant concern for residents in towns across the country who have stacks of consolidated mining rigs in open fields or warehouses in their community. The long waves of low-frequency noise travel for miles around a cryptocurrency mining facility and are often characterized as sounding like jet engines. In addition, according to a Berkeley Haas working paper, the power demands of cryptocurrency mining operations in upstate New York push up annual electric bills by about $165 million for small businesses and $75 million for individuals, with little or no local economic benefit. Although communities hosting cryptocurrency mining facilities experience few economic benefits due to minimal job creation and profits going to non-local corporate investors, these facilities can threaten other critical industries. In the Finger Lakes, for example, the $3 billion agritourism industry that employs over 65,000 people and relies on the lakes and the natural environment is directly threatened by the polluting activity of Greenwich. With respect to meeting our climate goals, large-scale cryptocurrency mining in New York State is significantly increasing the state's total base energy demand on the grid, putting further pressure on our need for a massive electrical line overhaul. Due to the overall increase in base demand, some estimates suggest we will need to increase our wind and solar infrastructure development goals by over 60% to meet our state climate goals, just with the existing, in development, and proposed cryptocurrency mining operations in New York. Other forms of validation, such as proof of stake, utilize far less energy. For example, Ethereum recently transitioned to proof of stake, resulting in a total immediate energy consumption reduction of over 99.9%. Please pass the Crypto Asset Environmental Transparency Act. We must carefully study the environmental and grid impacts of cryptocurrency mining methods, such as proof of work mining, and implement appropriate statutes and regulations to prevent the damage it is doing and will continue to do to our public health and environment. Thank you.
Yep, thank you so much. And Courtney Denklinger, whenever you're comfortable, please begin.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chairman Markey and Ranking Member Ricketts. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'd like to share a little bit about Nebraska Public Power District, or as I'll refer to it, NPPD, and the territory we serve to set the stage for my remarks regarding our experience with cryptocurrency mining. As Senator Ricketts mentioned, Nebraska's electric utility industry is unique in a legacy of Senator George Norris. We're the only 100% public power state in the nation. NPPD is a public corporation and a political subdivision of the state. We're not for profit. Our rates are set to deliver reliable, affordable, sustainable energy and related services to our customers. We do not have shareholders. Rather, our customers are in essence our owners. Our approximately 2,000 employees operate our integrated electric utility system, including generation, transmission, and distribution facilities. And our charted territory encompasses all or parts of 84 of the state's 93 counties, spanning 500 miles from east to west. The majority of our service territory is rural. The largest city we serve has fewer than 35,000 people. Much of the area receiving our power supply is farm and ranch land, where crops and livestock are grown to help feed America and the world, along with significant ag processing and other manufacturing. Our 3,200 megawatts of diverse generation located across the state includes nuclear, coal, gas, wind, hydro, and solar. This diverse generation mix helps us meet our customer expectations to be reliable, affordable, sustainable, and resilient. NPPD and our fellow Nebraska utilities are proud to offer some of the lowest rates and highest reliability among the 50 states. We serve our Nebraska customers with a resource mix that's 62% carbon-free. And in 2021, our board set a goal of achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050, while emphasizing the need to maintain reliability and affordability. In fact, we're actively pursuing multiple technologies as we look to the future of carbon-free energy. NPPD is leading Nebraska's efforts, along with partners in Iowa and Missouri, to pursue federal hydrogen hub designation. We're currently conducting a feasibility study to determine potential locations for advanced nuclear reactors. And we're working with the U.S. Department of Energy and several companies on carbon capture and sequestration opportunities. In Nebraska, like most other states, electric utilities, regardless of type, have exclusive retail service areas, which include an obligation to serve all customers under just, fair, and reasonable rates. We cannot refuse customers based on the business they may operate. We generally must serve all electric loads agreeing to meet applicable terms of service. And just as every generation source has its benefits and challenges, so does each type of customer load. Historically, steady electric demand from a customer resulted in the most efficient use of electric infrastructure and a lower cost per unit of electricity for those customers. Today, the variability of generation from an increasing amount of renewables, as well as other considerations, is allowing for opportunities for new tools to be implemented to manage generation and loads, including innovative rate designs and demand response. In our predominantly non-metro and rural service areas, diversification of businesses and economic growth is critical as these areas continue to see population declines. In fact, local leaders have been very receptive to crypto mining facilities as they've seen the potential for significant economic development benefits for their communities. An economic impact study performed for a crypto mining project in Nebraska showed over a $65 million economic impact on Nebraska's economy, nearly 200 associated and direct and indirect jobs, and $5.5 million in tax revenue. In rural areas, these economic benefits can be significant. The projects we've seen have an average wage of $60,000 per job, higher than our median household income. Unlike traditional hyperscale data centers, which often need to locate in metro areas for workforce and redundant fiber needs, these type of crypto operations are more suited for rural areas because of smaller workforce requirements, less stringent redundant fiber requirements, and although the number of jobs is smaller, again, these good paying opportunities can have significant impact in a rural area. These types of projects can also be more flexible with respect to siting and often seek locations where there's existing excess or unused transmission capacity. They also have very high capacity load factors, running nearly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is actually a benefit for load-serving entities. And the load can be very flexible. They often seek interruptible rates and can quickly drop loads, which has been proven to be helpful during local storm damage-related events and even larger scale grid events, where transmission or generation might be insufficient to serve load. With that, again, I appreciate the opportunity to share our experience with you today, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. And now we'll turn to a round of questions from senators. As we work to decarbonize our economy, we have to demystify electricity guzzling industries like Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin has an outsized effect on our grid and on our climate. And why is that? Well, because Bitcoin mining is inherently energy inefficient. The more demand there is for Bitcoin, the more work it takes to generate new Bitcoin. So I operated an ice cream truck to pay my way through college. So it's like saying that if my truck got worse gas mileage, it would be because each new ice cream, which I sold reduced the energy efficiency of the truck. Mr. Altenberg, is it true that Bitcoin's proof-of-work mining mechanism is set up to require more energy to earn each new Bitcoin as more miners come into the market?
Well, yes, it does, and that occurs in two different ways. One is the Bitcoin race, the difficulty level of mining a new block gets harder the more miners mine. That's on a short time scale, but we also have the issue on a longer time scale where every approximately 4 years, the amount of Bitcoin that you get from mining is cut in half.
So Bitcoin mining is like a fuel economy regulation in reverse. As time goes on and computers get faster, the network automatically adjusts to make sure more energy gets used. So, Mr. Altenberg, even if we improve the energy efficiency of crypto mining computers, would that lead to lower energy usage?
Bitcoin mining, again, it's inherently wasteful by design. The miners already have incentive to make the mining hardware as efficient as they possibly can because of the enormous amount of energy they have to use. The problem is, as efficient as they can possibly be, they are not efficient enough. You know, they're always going to increase the energy demand.
So Bitcoin uses as much electricity as we need to power every light in every home in the United States on a daily basis. Globally, if Bitcoin mining was a country, it would be in the top 30 countries based on energy use worldwide, above countries like Norway and Sweden. So, Mr. Altenberg, Bitcoin supporters predict that the Bitcoin price will increase dramatically in the coming years. Does that mean that the electricity demand from Bitcoin mining will also increase?
Well, as more miners enter the fray, enter the mining competition, we do see an increase, and we have seen that. When Bitcoin was worth $60,000 a Bitcoin, we had more active mining than we do at today's prices. So yes, it's going to continually get more difficult to mine Bitcoin, and the amount of Bitcoin miners are going to be rewarded with is going to continue to get less and less. This system will continue to spiral at an exponential rate using more and more energy.
So thank you. So Dr. Kellis, was uncontrolled energy use a factor of concern in your assessment of Bitcoin mining in New York State?
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly given the impact on, one, our climate goals, and two, our energy grid. So we have very aggressive climate goals, and the concern was that the amount of cryptocurrency mining that was growing rapidly in New York State would actually derail our ability to reach our climate goals. And particularly, the more renewable energy infrastructure we put on place, if we divert that to the cryptocurrency mining, there's a profound opportunity cost that exact same renewable energy infrastructure would not be available then for all of the existing building infrastructure and transportation infrastructure, which are two of the greatest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions that we want to get onto the electric grid.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kellis, very much. So at this juncture, there is a roll call on the floor of the Senate right now, and I'll leave it up to Senator Ricketts. My thought would be that I will hand the gavel over to him. I'm going to run over and make the roll call and try to get back here so that, like a relay race, he could run over and make the roll call as well. So let me turn it over to Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Chairman. So, Ms. Denlinger, we were talking a little bit earlier, and you have firsthand knowledge of the economic development that we were talking about, the jobs that are created, the investment, the tax revenues, and so forth that we get from investments in our state. Nebraska Public Power is no stranger to the crypto industry. What benefits in terms of economic development have you seen from new businesses in the crypto industry who are locating in Nebraska? Can you expand upon some of the things you were talking about before, please?
Absolutely. We've actually seen
I think I have the microphone.
Thank you, Senator. Absolutely. We've actually seen significant benefits from this industry to date, mostly from tax revenues and then job creation. And again, those are very good paying jobs, particularly in rural areas of Nebraska. The tax revenues for the state and local political subdivisions, we've seen just for one crypto mining facility in Nebraska, $1.6 million in state sales tax over a 12-month period. And during that same time frame, $3.8 million for the local taxing authorities. That enables infrastructure investments in the host communities. In fact, due to those increased tax revenues, that Nebraska community has been able to make significant enhancements to its regional municipal airport to attract commercial air service to the community, which is important not only from a quality of life perspective for the residents there, but also for recruiting additional economic development prospects to the area.
And would it is also fair to say that also helps keep property taxes down?
Absolutely, and that's certainly a concern in the state of Nebraska. Those sales tax revenues help every resident of the state on their property tax bill.
Are you hearing from companies that want to locate their crypto industry in the state of Nebraska, have expressed an interest in moving?
We certainly are, and there's a great deal of interest, due in large part, as you mentioned, to the low rates that we have, but also to the rate designs that we've put in place. And our customers, both rural public power districts and municipalities, are eager to host these opportunities, again, because of the tax benefits and the good-paying jobs that they bring. Nebraska is also rather unique because we've historically had additional capacity available. We're the country's largest irrigator, thanks to the Ogallala Aquifer, and many irrigation wells have been converted to electric from diesel. This load, while large, is seasonal. So 2 to 3 months out of the year, during the summer, those irrigation wells demand a lot of electricity. But the remainder of the year, we have additional capacity to spare.
All right, great. One of the things that's been mentioned here today is the impact of these facilities on emissions, that crypto assets, mining businesses are responsible for increasing fossil fuel use and driving up greenhouse gas emissions. Ms. Dentlinger, my understanding is that Nebraska Public Power District is leading the way in the development and deployment of new clean energy technology, such as supporting a regional hydrogen hub, you mentioned that in your opening remarks, and supporting deployment of carbon capture technologies, which you also mentioned. Can you tell us a little bit more about the role new industries play in supporting clean energy technology and adoption in Nebraska?
Yes, load growth creates opportunities. And as you mentioned, we're exploring a number of those currently. We're in the process of developing our integrated resource plan, and new load means an opportunity for additional generation resources, and clean energy technologies would be part of those additions. In fact, any new generation resources we deploy would have a lower carbon footprint. Loads with higher load factors, such as crypto mining, which means they're utilizing electricity at steady rates rather than ramping up and down, can produce more constant revenue streams, which in turn can help finance those clean energy technology deployments.
So just to kind of simplify this a little bit for me, is it fair to say that if you and your community have a cryptocurrency or crypto asset generating facility that is creating more demand for electricity, and because of the scales in utility generation, you can actually help reduce the utility bills for other customers? Is that fair?
So we work very hard to make sure that we're not shifting costs among various types of customer classes. We certainly are not subsidizing crypto. But because those mining operations, again, are so stable in the usage of electricity, it actually helps systemically for those costs that we do socialize to bring the cost down for every user.
Yeah, so because you've got, again, that consistent demand, you can keep it other people's rates relatively lower. Is that fair?
Yes, consistent usage 24/7 can actually be the most efficient use of electric infrastructure.
All right, great, thank you. Mr. Carper.
Mr. Chairman, been in the Senate for less than 3 months. He's already chairing committees, overthrowing Ed Markey. And thank you for letting me work into the lineup. Okay, thank you. Mr. Altenberg, right? And is it Kellis? Kellis?
Correct, it's Kellis.
Okay, good, thank you. I want to start off by thanking Senator Markey, our chair, for today's hearing on his legislation that seeks to shine light on the impacts of cryptocurrency on our environment. I held the first oversight hearing in Congress on cryptocurrency almost 10 years ago, on November 18th, 2013, when I was privileged to be chairman of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. And today we are here having, I think, the first hearing in the Senate that is focused on the environmental impacts of cryptocurrencies. Regardless of what you believe about the role of cryptocurrency in the global economy, I hope we can all agree that cryptocurrency shouldn't be increasing pollution that affects the air we breathe and the water we drink, or that otherwise degrades our climate and our environment. Today, we know that some cryptocurrencies require a massive amount of energy to power and control the temperature literally of thousands of computers, which run, I'm told, all day and all night. I'm told that cryptocurrency currently uses up to 1.4% of our nation's electricity. 1.4% of our nation's electricity. That's as much electricity as is needed to light every home in this country. When I first saw that, I had to read it twice. That's as much electricity as is needed to light every home in this country. As many industries are looking to reduce their energy usage, we've heard today that cryptocurrency electricity usage is surging as the need for additional computing power grows. We've also heard today that there's a lack of data on where and how this power is being generated. I think I was going to start off with a question, Mr. Altenberg, first of you and then Ms. Kellis, and go something like this. Are there ways for cryptocurrency to have fewer environmental impacts and still allow communities to benefit from the economic engine that it can provide?
Certainly, Senator. Our main concern is about proof of work cryptocurrency, which is the system that Bitcoin uses. This system is wasteful by design. Part of the mechanism for generating new Bitcoin requires using enormous amounts of energy. The number 2 Bitcoin or cryptocurrency by market cap in the nation right now, Ethereum, uses just a tiny, tiny fraction of that, and there are literally dozens of competing technologies that can accomplish everything Bitcoin can do and more without using that enormous amount of electricity.
Say again the approach that uses so much less electricity. Say it again.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, you just said that there was an alternative that uses a lot less electricity, creates. And who was that? I just didn't hear.
Well, Ethereum is a competing cryptocurrency. It uses a system called proof of stake. That's a class of systems that can reduce the energy while still maintaining blockchain technology and cryptocurrency.
All right, thank you. All right, if I could, Ms. Kellis, same question. Are there ways for cryptocurrency to have fewer environmental impacts and still allow communities to benefit from the economic engine that it can provide?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I wanted to just note with respect to Bitcoin first, Bitcoin is one of the most consolidated cryptocurrencies on the planet. 0.01% of the accounts own about 27% of the currency. So to say that this is a currency accessible to all people, I think is misinformation. What was previously mentioned, proof of stake, is another form of validating. There are about 16 different forms of validations of cryptocurrencies. Proof of stake is the second most common. That's what Ethereum is built on. Ethereum also proved that you can change from proof of work to proof of stake, sort of in the middle of flying the plane, right, when the blockchain is already active. So it is possible for ones that are using proof of work to shift over and reduce their total energy consumption by about over 99%. The thing that I think also is really important is that proof of stake is in many ways more nimble. It is really the validation system where a lot of smart contracts are used, where there is a lot of the innovations in decentralized finance, Web3 systems. So I would actually say that proof of stake is where we can see expect a lot of the innovation to happen, and not on more dinosaur proof of work based validation methods.
Thanks very much for that. I'm going to come back to Mr. Altenberg, to you, if I might. What types of data or further research are needed to better understand, to monitor, and to mitigate the energy and climate impacts of cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. One of the big problems that we're seeing right now, particularly in Pennsylvania, is just a lack of knowledge. We've asked even regulators where all of the crypto mines are, and they really can't say with any degree of certainty. We've had a situation that happened in January of 2021 where inspectors from the state's Department of Environmental Protection showed up at a fracked gas well and found Bitcoin mining hardware plugged in. Nobody applied for permits, nobody notified anybody. These operations can just start up overnight. So that's why the reporting requirement of the Crypto Asset Transparency Act is particularly important, so we have some ability to see where these facilities come into communities. Sometimes when they come into the communities, they say, we're a data center. They don't even mention crypto mining. So even the community has no idea what's going on next door.
I'm a United States Senator, but I've been a recovering governor for like 22 years. And as a former governor, I love to learn what works well at the state level and do more of what works well, find out what works and do more of that. States and governors are pretty good at that when it comes to addressing difficult problems. What are some of the lessons learned from your experiences addressing pollution from cryptocurrencies in New York that may not have been mentioned yet in this hearing?
Well, I would elaborate on two that have been mentioned but haven't really been extensively discussed, which is the impact on water quality. So we have a facility that sort of started the conversation here, and I mentioned it in my testimony, Greenwich. And they pull in up to 140 million gallons of water a day from the lake and use that heat to cool the facility and then release it back into a Class C trout stream. Trout show signs of stress and start to die out at over 70 degrees temperature, and the water's released at up to 108 degrees temperature. So seriously affecting the ecosystem, but also affecting all of the livelihoods around that area, including fishing, hunting, the agritourism industry, as I mentioned, which we have the Napa Valley of the East. The wine industry here is really important. So not only does the facility affect the water quality, but it also affects the experience because of profound noise pollution. The other thing we haven't talked about as much, and I think is really important, is the opportunity cost of investing significantly in cryptocurrency mining operations. We have huge amounts of greenhouse gases as a state, as I said earlier, from our buildings, from our transportation, and other aspects of our industry, of our state economy. And it is going to be a significant challenge to get all of those onto electrification. And the more cryptocurrency mining we have in the state that is feeding directly off the grid, then the harder it will be to get all of those onto the grid because of the strain that we experience. And I'll say one last thing, which is I hear often from the proponents that cryptocurrency mining can act as a battery. And that's simply not true. It doesn't produce any energy. It doesn't store any excess energy. It can shut off when there is high demand. But in most cases that I've read of, in fact, it actually has a contract, like in Texas, where it gets paid to shut off. And in fact, Texas makes, in some cases, the cases that I've read, more money when they shut off than when they do, running their facility. So I would not say that that is a cost-free battery storage system in place. It is an opportunity cost. And we really should be focusing on investing in the renewable energy infrastructure and long-term storage to create a long-term renewable energy infrastructure for our state.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, let me just say thank you for bringing us together and bringing our witnesses to consider this issue. This is frankly not something, as we were going through the battle to fight on climate change and crafting legislation, whether it's the climate provisions in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, whether it's the work that we did in the Inflation Reduction Act. That's not something that I don't think many of us have thought about. Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
No,
And our thanks to our witnesses for joining us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. And, a lot of this just fits into the frame of just energy efficiency. My mother would always say, Eddie, your father and I were going to donate your brain to Harvard Medical School as a completely unused human organ. And she would say, you have to learn how to work smarter and not harder. I'd be 10, 11, 12. She'd just keep saying the same thing. So, when I authored the appliance efficiency laws in 1987, for example, air conditioning is 80% of peak demand in Texas in the summer. Well, what if they doubled the efficiency? It would be half the electricity that people would have to purchase. And they fought it, but once the law passed, they did it. And the same thing true for refrigerators, for stoves. They figured it out. Same thing was true for automobiles. I used to make the amendment every year on the House floor to increase fuel economy standards. And the auto industry said, you just don't know how hard it is. And so we finally, in 2007, we passed, my bill. And then Elon Musk just went to the markets and said, hey, I'll be able to meet the standard. Give me money for all electric vehicles. So that's what we're talking about here. We're just talking about, in my mother's words, working smarter and not harder and getting the same result. So the Bitcoin network
Chairman,
uses...
could I just say,
Yeah.
I think our parents were talking with each other, even back then.
A correct assessment of our untapped human potential. I agree with you. And I'm sure that it's a miracle that we're here from their perspective, given our attitudes at age 10. So the Bitcoin network uses a mechanism called proof of work to issue new Bitcoins to miners. The problem is in the name itself. You need to prove you've done a lot of work and used a lot of energy in order to get awarded any Bitcoin. We can't be fooled into thinking that this amount of energy must be used in order to participate in crypto asset markets. Other assets like Ethereum use methods that cut energy use by 99.9%. So, Mr. Altenberg, could Bitcoin change its code to save substantial amounts of energy?
Well, Ethereum certainly did that, switch from proof of work to proof of stake. Whether or not Bitcoin itself can arrange to do that, that would remain to be seen, but it's certainly possible.
It is possible. So if it is possible, and it's more energy efficient, and it gets the same result, they could move in that direction and still achieve their economic goals. So this isn't an issue that is built into blockchains. It's an issue that has been built into Bitcoin, which is a difference. Right? It all depends upon how that company industry approaches this issue of energy efficiency. All power plants are held to the same emissions standards. All trucks are held to the same emissions standards. But crypto assets don't have those across-the-board standards. Some, like Bitcoin, get away with damage that the others would never dream of. And so that has to be the goal, because we know that Bitcoin mining will also increase if they have more energy efficiency standards, which they use. So is, in your opinion, a higher Bitcoin price means more incentive for Bitcoin miners to use more energy? And you do agree with that?
Yeah, we've seen that in practice.
Yeah, you've seen that in practice. So we just have to recognize that and then take the analogous situation with refrigerators, stoves, air conditioning, automobiles, okay, and just say that we're not looking to end refrigeration or automotive technology. We're just saying that we should be more efficient. We should be more aware of the emissions into our atmosphere that are avoidable. So on the one hand, this is a very innovative sector economically. And they tout themselves as innovators. But all we're asking for them to do is look across the board at innovation, not just that one idea, but embracing innovation in energy efficiency, innovation in the technologies which they use in order to generate their innovation. And that's why this hearing is so important, so that we can have a kind of a meeting of the minds over mining, right? So that we benefit from all of the kind of the lessons we've learned over the last 30 years that people thought were absolutely impossible to implement. So, so I thank you all again for the information, and let me turn again to Senator Ricketts.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Altenberg, you had mentioned a couple of things. I just want to, that you said were problems with Bitcoin generation, or I think you were talking about Bitcoin in particular. But you mentioned that they were talking about bringing online 3 waste coal plants into Pennsylvania. Is that right? So now, again, I'm from Nebraska. I'm not from Pennsylvania, so I don't know all the rules. But wouldn't each of those plants have to be permitted to be able to go into operation? And if to reach that and to get those permits, wouldn't they have to comply with the overall emissions targets for the state of Pennsylvania? Wouldn't that work?
The plants, and there's 2 waste coal plants that are in operation. They were existing waste coal plants. They were in operation, and they were operating at very, very low capacity factors. Most of these, all these plants are heavily subsidized. Pennsylvanians pay 60% of the energy costs for the Bitcoin miners at these plants through subsidies from taxpayers and ratepayers. But yes, they do. The plants do meet their current permits, but they are increasing their emissions because of Bitcoin mining.
So, but what is there? Would there be a limit though on what they would be able to generate as far as power, because they're generating more emissions, or do they have some sort of grandfather clause that allows them to just continue to generate?
Well, the state has established permit limits for them based on the fact they're 90 megawatt plants each. And they were operating, again, much lower capacity, so they weren't operating anywhere near that before Bitcoin mining started, and now they've ramped up their capacity. So where they are, we believe, operating under their permit limits, they are still emitting a lot more than they were just a few years ago.
Okay. And then you also mentioned something about Bitcoin operators plugging into fracking gas wells, and that was illegal. Is that my understanding? So there's laws against them doing that, is that right? I mean, like without getting a permit, that is.
They plugged it in without a permit. The Department of Environmental Protection issued a notice of violation in that case, but I believe there's still litigation in progress over that.
So, but essentially what you're saying is it was illegal for them to do that in the first place, so they were breaking the laws anyway, right? Is that accurate?
I believe they were, but that has not been determined yet.
Not been proven yet, okay. And then you also mentioned the noise pollution as well. So help me again with Pennsylvania. Are there rules or permit? I mean, like, don't you have to get a permit or something with regard to noise or generation for facilities?
Noise pollution is generally handled by local municipalities, and it's traditionally been handled as a local nuisance issue. So one of one of the recent fracked gas wells that is going into operation to mine Bitcoin is in a location of the state called the Pennsylvania Wilds, which is some of our most pristine habitat. Frankly, there aren't a lot of neighbors in that area to file noise pollution complaints. What we have is a considerable amount of wildlife that the tourism industry depends on. So this noise pollution could directly impact the tourist industry, but there really isn't a strong regulatory mechanism.
So, but there would be a local entity, maybe a county or somebody like that, who could put, limits on how much noise you could generate. Is that accurate? I mean, there is some form of local government there to put in those.
There is local government. I don't know the extent of their authority towards noise pollution.
Okay. Dr. Kellis, I think you also mentioned that the noise pollution was one of the things. I think you described it as a jet engine. Is that accurate? So same thing, same question to you. Isn't there local entities like a county or a city that would put in ordinances or whatever to say, hey, you can only have so much noise allowed?
Yeah, and there actually has been some efforts. Again, like my colleague mentioned, there are limits on how much they can prevent and permit. There have been, there's at least one example of a moratorium on cryptocurrency mining because of issues of noise and other safety issues, fire and health safety issues. There was a temporary one. So they were able to do a temporary one there, yes.
And Ms. Dentler, we're running out of time here, so I'll ask you to be brief, but your experience at NPPD, I know that some counties in Nebraska have ordinances with regard to, say, wind setbacks for noise and so forth. Is that your experience in Nebraska as well?
Yes, I'd speak from my previous economic development experience. Typically, we'd see zoning regulations both within municipalities and then within counties. And if they wanted to regulate decibel levels from any industry, and as you mentioned, we've seen that recently with wind, they put those regulations in place.
All right, great, thank you.
Great. So as I said in my opening remarks, this virtual commodity has real-world impact. We don't know the total scope of the environmental effects of crypto mining. And the White House Office of Science and Technology has specifically called for more information, but they don't have the authority to call for it, which is why the Crypto Asset Environmental Transparency Act is so important. Mr. Altenberg, do you agree that this legislation would provide more transparency and disclosure, which could help us to oversee and understand the environmental impacts of crypto mining? It's almost alone in the entire American economy, kind of sealed off from the knowledge, the information, which everyone should have about the environmental impacts of the industry.
And in Pennsylvania, we have an environmental rights amendment to our Constitution that guarantees the public actually the ownership of their public natural resources. One of the big things we're seeing with cryptocurrency and the lack of transparency is the public does not know where these facilities are coming in. They do not know where they're using the power. They do not know where the power is being used. They do not know where the pollution is. As long as we have that, the state is not in a position where they're going to be able to effectively regulate these facilities.
Yeah, when I was growing up in Ward 2 in Malden, Malden is a city about 4 miles north of Boston. My grandfather got off the boat, from Ireland, worked on the Malden River, and I'm growing up 3 blocks from there. And my mother, when I was about 10, again, much more intelligent than I am, she would just say, Eddie, whatever you do, don't swim in the Malden River. Because it was kind of black with a pre-Jimi Hendrix purple haze. Because all the industries use the Malden River as the dumping ground. The coal industry, every Converse All-Star was made in my home water. 8,000 people just using the Malden River. So it was, obviously an era where there really weren't a lot of regulations. But there was a kind of a black cloud over our neighborhood. growing up. Now, the other side of town, they didn't have a blackout. That's where, other people live. But in my home ward, kind of the working class ward, and every city has a ward like that. So my goal here is just to provide the transparency, the disclosure that could help us to oversee and understand the environmental impacts of crypto mining. So, Dr. Kellis, is that an unreasonable thing to ask, that people just understand what the impacts are?
Absolutely not an unreasonable thing to ask. We can't improve our environment if we don't know how it's being used and we don't know what's happening around us. I'll give you perfect examples. One, we're now aware of the coal piles that were being used for providing energy, the coal piles that are left over and sitting on the riverbank edges in Pennsylvania. And so now, because of the fact that that made it into the news, otherwise we would not have known, we're having an honest conversation about it. And the proponents would say that, it's better to burn it than let it sit there and have the pollutants like the mercury leak into the waterways. But I would ask in that conversation, which is better, that it pollutes the water or pollutes the air? If we don't have transparency and we don't have disclosure, we can't have an honest conversation about that. And neither one of those pollutions are what we're looking for. And of course, burning it, then we end up with the ash. So that is another pollutant. And just like, it was a great analogy, just like with coffee, running water over coffee grounds like the ash leaches far more coffee, or in this case, mercury, out than if you ran water over whole coffee beans, which is the actual unburnt coal. So which one is worse? But again, we can have that honest conversation, but we can't if we don't have the disclosure and we don't have the transparency.
Okay, so again, you make the case for more transparency because you can't manage what you don't measure. But unfortunately, we do know that harms are being felt now by families across the country. I've received testimony from 12 states, from Georgia to Washington State, about the damage that crypto mining is already doing in their communities. And I would just ask unanimous consent that this testimony be included in the record without objection. So ordered. We're joined by Senator Lummis from Wyoming, and let's turn and recognize you, Senator, for a round of questions.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is for Mr. Altenberg. What does a digital asset mining operation look like? I mean, are there shovels digging in the ground? What does it look like?
It depends where the location, though. The mining sites that are being placed at our fracked gas wells, they're essentially semi-trailers that have methane gas-powered generators that are plugged into the well, and big shipping containers full of racks of Bitcoin miners.
Okay, and a Bitcoin miner is actually a computer.
Yeah, it's about the size of a toaster, and it uses 3 times the energy of a house.
Okay, so there is a bunch of toasters in a line. Sometimes they're dipped in fluids, so they run cooler. They can be air-cooled, they can be water-cooled, but it's basically just a computer.
Yes.
So is that computer that's mining Bitcoin directly emitting pollutants?
No, it's energy source. It's electric source is what's emitting.
Okay. So now let's take an EV charging station. If that EV charging station is powered by electricity from natural gas or coal, shouldn't it also have the same monitoring that is being requested by this bill?
I think the issue is looking at how efficiency is measured. It's all sources of electricity, whether it's the lights or the speaker system here, are going to use electricity and produce a certain amount of work for that electricity. The issue with Bitcoin and proof of work cryptocurrency is the work that we are doing is not actually necessary to have cryptocurrency or to have blockchain technology.
Okay, let's talk about gold. Where does gold come from?
It's mined.
It's mined, okay. Is energy expended in producing gold?
Yes.
Okay. Is gold absolutely essential?
For certain technologies, it is.
Is it Congress's job to decide whether an energy use is worthwhile or not? I mean, surely you've heard that Bitcoin is digital gold because it is limited to 21 million Bitcoin ever to be mined. It is permissionless, which means you don't have to rely on a third party, a trusted third party, to do transactions in it or to hold it. It is a store of value, and that is commonly agreed to. Okay, so you've got gold, it's a store of value. You've got Bitcoin, it's a store of value. They both consume energy to produce. Now, is it Congress's role to say gold is a more worthwhile use of energy than Bitcoin?
There is a long history of that very thing. We have energy efficiency standards for appliances. We've got CAFE standards for vehicles. And for most air pollution, for most new air pollution sources, there's legal requirements that before they operate, they install the best available technology to reduce the pollution. So we do make those decisions every day.
So we're still mining coal in this country. We're still producing natural gas, and we have the cleanest burning natural gas in probably the world here in the United States, and produce it in the most environmentally sound manner. But it's a hydrocarbon. So if my car is oil consuming or natural gas consuming, is it a less worthy use of energy than energy that comes from coal and natural gas, but is converted to electricity for an EV?
Well, there are using vehicles, our entire transportation network requires a certain amount of energy, and there are economic benefits that we get from that transportation network.
I have one, and my time's about up, so thank you. I have a question for Ms. Detlinger. Do you view digital asset mining operations as a negative for the power sector?
I certainly don't speak for the entire power sector, but within the state of Nebraska, we've actually seen benefits. We have not seen the drawbacks that have been mentioned during the hearing today. And most of those have just been managed locally, whether by the municipality, by the county, or by the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy.
If you have a natural gas well and you're venting the natural gas because that well is not hooked up to a gathering line, is it better to vent it into the atmosphere, or is it better to use the energy to produce something of value?
In my opinion, it's much better to actually use the energy and produce something of value.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you so much. Air pollution is a major area of concern around crypto mining as miners are bringing coal and gas-fired plants back online, or even using dirtier sources of energy like waste coal in order to buy power for their mining rigs. Mr. Altenberg, have you seen instances where crypto miners have kept dirty and inefficient power plants online?
It certainly appears they have, especially in the two waste coal power plants in Pennsylvania. Prior to Bitcoin mining operation, they were running at very, very low capacity factors. Coal-fired power plants tend to run 60, 70, maybe 80% or more of the time, and they tend to want to run full out at a very constant rate. These plants were running closer to 10% of the time. So when Bitcoin came into operation, part of the goal was to increase the output of these power plants.
So the energy use of Bitcoin, especially if it brings carbon-intensive generation back onto the grid, could threaten our climate goals and supercharge climate change. We already know we are living through unprecedented climate chaos. If Congress turns a blind eye to an energy-intensive industry like Bitcoin while it works to tackle climate impacts, it's like a plumber that tries to fix an overflowing bathtub while the faucet won't stop running. The problem won't go away, and the damage will just get worse if you don't deal with the potential dangers that are right in front of you. So, Dr. Kellis, do you agree that crypto mining jeopardizes state and federal climate commitments?
Absolutely. To answer it in the context of what you were just speaking about, in New York State, we have about 49 retired power plants, and they're retired because they are less efficient. They're old, using older technology, single cycle turbine technology, and could not compete on the market with the more modern dual cycle turbine technology, for example. So they were mothballed. The cryptocurrency mining industry is buying up power plants in New York State, turning them back on, and running them up to their full greenhouse gas emissions allowable permits. And that is a situation where we had these facilities that were at zero emissions. They were shut down because of their inefficiency. So even if they're converted, as one of them was, from coal to natural gas, that we still have a significant increase in greenhouse gas emissions from that facility than zero, which is where we were. And of course, everyone knows at this point that methane is a stronger greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And although coal is less clean with respect to all the types of particulates that it releases into the air, with the gas-fired power plant, particularly with a single cycle turbine that is less efficient, we are, of course, having significant increases in methane that is released through the entire process of getting the gas to the facility, and then, of course, from the facility. So it is significantly, I believe, hurting our ability to reach our climate goals. And we see another facility that is working to come online, and we have all the others that are in our state. So we are very worried, and that is why New York State put a moratorium on any of these power plants being turned back on by large-scale corporate cryptocurrency miners, so that we ourselves could do a full-scale investigation of the impact of cryptocurrency mining on our ability to reach our climate goals.
So thank you. So industry figures claim that Bitcoin miners can burn flared or vented methane gas to power their mining operations. We know that we need to cut down on our methane emissions. That's why we passed an historic methane emission reduction program as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. But I'm curious as to whether these claims hold water. Mr. Altenberg, do you believe that there are better ways to deal with flared and vented methane than using it to power Bitcoin mining operations?
What we've seen with Bitcoin mining, the innovation we've seen has been innovation in ways to justify that wasting energy is good. Methane is particularly one of the situations. If you have a situation where you have enough methane that you can capture, that you are flaring, if you can capture it to run a Bitcoin mine, you might as well capture it and put it into the distribution pipeline and get useful work out of it. There is no need to waste the energy that we're wasting on Bitcoin.
So if there's better ways to deal with vented methane, we should avoid fossil fuels in the first place. And at the end of the day, we have direct reports of harms and significant projections of impacts in our society. So that's just why we need more transparency across the board. That's what we're fighting for today. We're not saying ban. We're not saying don't ban. We're just saying let's just know what's happening. Information will be helpful for everyone, no matter where they live, to just understand, like my mother did, and saying just don't swim in the Malden River. She didn't have any evidence except for the black cloud over our home ward, which weren't over the other 7 wards in Malden. But, the EPA wasn't even created, for 20 more years after I was a boy. So obviously, you just can't be working off of your gut. You need some information. So if the industry is confident in its positive contributions to the environment, they should welcome the transparency of the Crypto Asset Environmental Transparency Act that would provide that information. Really, only vampires are afraid of the sunshine. And in the same way that so many devices that we plug in at night now, we're all plugging in all these devices every night. They're almost vampires consuming all this electricity. And I had this big battle actually about 15, 18 years ago with the computer industry because they were, of course, God's gift. Oh my goodness, don't ask us to do any more. Didn't we do a great job in just providing you with all these laptops, at home? Don't ask us to do anything else. So I just said to them, well, is there any way, that you could cut the electricity consumption for the home computer when it's just on overnight in the default position, when you have your kids' pictures up all night? Can you just cut that electricity consumption overnight? Oh, you have no idea how difficult that is. Oh my goodness. You're asking us to try to figure out something like that after we've given you the great gift of home computers? And of course, they figured it out. Okay, well, why would we have 100 million devices, unnecessarily consuming electricity when you could just put the fix in, to make sure that it's more efficient while getting the benefit of the new technological breakthrough? But that's just kind of the default position of a new group of geniuses in their little industry. Okay, you can't actually call upon us to have any additional burdens when all we're saying is, like my mother, work smarter, not harder. Okay, just use a more efficient way of doing it. So let me again turn to Senator Ricketts for more questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Kellis, you had said that in New York that the crypto industry was going to turn on 49 plants that had been retired. Is that accurate?
No, what I said is we have 49 power plants, and the concern is that there was a trend beginning. We saw one purchased and turned back on, and another purchased in the permitting process and turned back on with existing rigs that they have. We have 49 in the state. The concern was if that trend continued without us evaluating the full impact on our ability to reach our climate goals with respect to GHG emissions, water impacts, and air quality impacts, then we might not reach our climate goals. So the idea, of course, was that we needed to stop that particular trend. And I want to be clear that this was a very narrow moratorium. It was specifically on the purchasing of retired power plants in the state by consolidated cryptocurrency mining corporations. Of course, you and I probably can't afford on our own to buy a retired power plant, but this did not pertain to those that were plugged into the grid or those using renewable energy infrastructure on site. So it was narrow, but the intention was to give us the opportunity and time to measure the full extent of the impact, which I think is fundamentally parallel to what you are trying to do with this piece of legislation, to capture the data and be able to do a full analysis.
So presumably the other plants went through a permitting process. Is that accurate? And or at least the one plant that did get up and running went through a permitting process and got permitted, and so that was in operation. Is that accurate?
So actually, the first used the permits that had been in place. They got an extension of those permits, but then they went through a renewal process this last year and actually were denied an extension of that, the air permit, because it was recognized that the permit and the activity that was being used for that facility no longer aligned with our Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. That is currently in the courts because that was appealed. That will go through, I presume, for potentially even years. But that was the initial process. The water permit was extended at the time, actually for 4 years. They were out of compliance with the permit that required that they put a screen on the the pipe that was pulling water into from the lake and then into the facility, and therefore, because there wasn't the screen, it was killing wildlife, a significant amount of wildlife. Last year, they did finally put that screen in and are now compliant. They were given a couple extra months to become compliant. So that's with the water permit, and we'll see what happens with the renewal of that permit.
So it's safe to say, though, there is a process in place for the permits, and they go through the process, and the state itself was deciding whether or not to give those permits. Is that right? I mean, you just said that the state denied them on the air permit. And so there's a way in place to be able to address the emissions, correct?
Not fully. So those are only the facilities that are in power plants. But as we've talked about, there are many different types of facilities. So they could be, many rigs inside shipping containers in a field, which is very common. They can be in a warehouse, all of those plugged into the grid. They could be plugged into the grid, but doing net metering, so paying for hydroelectric. But then there's the question of opportunity costs. The reason for the requirement for the full environmental
Generation
impact
things
assessment
require, all those power
is to allow
generations
for that
require
full
permitting,
assessment.
right? But everything that would
that
generate
again?
power, everything that's going to provide power to any of these crypto things is going to have to be permitted, right?
No, not necessarily. If you are pulling directly from the grid and you have a warehouse on your property, even if you have a different type of business, that does not require a permit.
The power that is generated that go into that warehouse, it has to be permitted, right?
Not necessarily, no.
So you have power generation,
generation
facilities in
There's
New
no
York that are
power
not
generation.
permitted? So there's no
No,
power
there's no
generation?
power generation. So if you are plugged directly into the grid, you are not producing your own energy.
But somebody's producing the energy if it is supplying it,
The
right?
grid.
Yeah.
So if they're
But
buying the energy from the grid, that's just the grid. They want to pay a more electricity bill, they will.
But somebody has to put power into that grid, which means it has to be permitted someplace, right?
What's permitted would be the hydroelectric or any of the electrical generating facilities, but not a warehouse that is just tied onto the grid.
Dr. Callis, I think you're missing my point that anything that's going to generate power, that's going to create emissions, is going to be permitted. And there's a rule and system in place to be able to handle that. And you yourself are demonstrating in New York that you're taking steps to limit emissions based upon what you want to do in New York. And in fact, putting a moratorium on bringing on any of these other lines. So you're actually
I'm
taking
being
the
very
steps doing it,
clear.
right?
With all due respect, I'm being very clear, there is energy generation and there's energy usage. Energy generation is regulated. Energy usage, if you have a restaurant, or if you have a warehouse, or if you have a superstore, you are not permitted for your energy usage. Usage is not the same as generation. A generator is permitted. If you are not a generator, then you are not permitted in that way.
Right, and that was my point, is that all this power generation, not the use, the power generation is permitted, and New York is taking steps to do it. And is New York?
But the question
is New York?
is whether or not there is an opportunity cost, because the energy that is used, the significant amount of energy that is used, when we are trying to get our entire grid onto renewable energy infrastructure, if we are increasing our base load on that grid significantly, then we will have to increase significantly our renewable energy infrastructure construction goals. And the question is whether or not we have the land infrastructure and other, ability to reach those goals, right? We have limited amount of land that we can build solar on, for example, and it competes directly with agricultural land and food production. So there are limits.
So is Nebraska New York, and vice versa, is New York Nebraska?
No, it is not.
So they're different states. So is it fair to say that different states are going to have different needs with regard to power generation and permitting and clean air and things like that?
Yes, and I would say with a caveat that any increased energy demands that you are putting on a grid means that you will need to produce more renewable energy infrastructure to make that grid completely renewable.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kellis. I've run way over. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being.
Absolutely no problem. I love this subject. It's just, honestly, every question we're asking is vastly expanding the body of knowledge for all other senators. Okay, this is like the frontier in terms of issues, and it gets kind of arcane until you have the discussion, then you can keep reducing it down to a more simple understanding of what we're talking about. So, so I love any question that anyone, because I'm learning from all of this as well. So, Mr. Altenberg, do you think crypto mining supports or undermines our national goal for a clean, affordable, and reliable electricity grid?
It certainly does. I mean, even in the situation where we have crypto mining coming from our nuke plants, that's diverting carbon-free energy from the grid. We heard testimony, we've heard people say that doing things like using more Bitcoin mining can incentivize solar or bring more solar on the grid, but that's not what we're seeing happening on the ground. The Bitcoin miners, they are incentivized to use energy sources that are available at very, very high capacity factors. In almost all cases, those are fossil fuel or formerly baseload resources. And those resources we have to, if we are going to decarbonize our grid, we're going to need clean renewable generation, and wasting energy on unnecessary proof of work mining when we can have cryptocurrency and blockchain technology without that is just counterproductive.
So do you think that more disclosure would stifle or actually encourage innovation in this industry?
More disclosure always helps regulators. And I speak from working for 22 years as a state regulator. Having the information to back up our decisions is absolutely essential.
Yeah, and so I just have a couple of more questions. And do you have any additional questions,
I do,
Senator?
yeah.
Oh, you do. Okay, great. So it's the goal of the legislation to provide transparency on all types of environmental impacts. People who live near crypto mining facilities have said, quote, it's like living on top of Niagara Falls, and that it's like a jet that never leaves. Dr. Kellis, is it true that crypto mining facilities produce nonstop noise, which can affect quality of life, especially in rural communities?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I hear also from constituents around the state, that it has not only significantly impacted their own experience, because many of them are in fields, many of them are in places where there aren't that many people. We have examples of a large-scale cryptocurrency mining trails. And it's significantly impacting people's ability to appreciate nature and get away, because it is like standing on a tarmac, is what I've heard from people. But there's also some disturbing data, the impact of the noise on animal species, birds, which I think is actually particularly disturbing given the estimates of decline in birds that we are already seeing.
Okay, could you also talk about the facilities using water in excess of unnecessary quantities?
Yeah, so the facility that began this conversation, as I spoke of earlier, Greenwich, does pull in up to 140 million gallons of water a day. And releases it at significantly higher temperatures. One thing that I haven't emphasized is that we have seen massive surges in harmful algal bloom outbreaks all throughout all of the Finger Lakes, the Great Lakes, even coastal areas. And that can be directly impacted by increasing temperatures from these facilities. So that is also harmful. It's harmful for all of the wildlife and also toxic for humans.
Okay, and one final question, which is that some of the supplemental testimony which has been submitted today states that each Bitcoin transaction is tied to the same amount of e-waste as throwing away 2 iPhones. Could you talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. The e-waste, there's some research showing a massive exponential global increase in e-waste directly tied to cryptocurrency mining. But I would also note it's not just the existence of e-waste, which in and of itself is concerning, but a large percentage of e-waste produced every year is exported from the high-income countries to low- and middle-income countries, where regulations on its dismantling, recycling, and refurbishing may be lacking or even poorly enforced. And according to the WHO, an estimated 12.9 million women, and I think it was 18 million children and adolescents as young as 5 years old, work in the informal waste sector, which potentially exposes them to toxic e-waste. Their goal in this work is often to recover copper and gold from used electronics, risking exposure to harmful chemicals such as lead, mercury, nickel, brominated flame retardants, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. So all of these are highly correlated with some health issues like stillbirth and premature birth, low birth weight and length, and exposure to lead, of course, we know has a lot of neurological issues, increasing rates of ADHD, behavioral problems, sensory integration difficulties. So huge, huge issues that we are not discussing sufficiently with respect to the health and the escalating e-waste from this industry.
Yep. Thank you so much, Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Altenberg, so you've, and many times throughout the course of the day today, have described this as wasteful energy. I think you said it should be used for useful work. But you also said that a Bitcoin, once you mine it, it's worth $144,000, right?
That's what the market value is.
Yeah. Okay. So doesn't that mean if there's a market for it, that somebody considers it valuable because they're willing to pay for it?
Well, people certainly see a cash value in, but the question of what does it do productive for the economy? I mean, Warren Buffett had said in an interview not too long ago that when you buy Bitcoin, you have nothing, and the only thing you really have is the hope that somebody else is going to pay more.
Well, what do you use the blockchain technology for, right?
Well, a blockchain itself could be potentially used for a lot of different things. Smart contracts was one of the things was mentioned, which Bitcoin isn't currently capable of doing, but Ethereum is. But certainly recording data in a secure way, it's
encryption. You talked about before how hard it was to break that encryption, right?
Well, it isn't the encryption. It isn't the blockchain is very transparent. You can see everything that's on it. What it is, what's happened is it's very, very difficult to change, and it's basically a write-once structure.
Okay. So then, who are the people that find value in Bitcoin?
Mostly currency speculators.
Okay. And so, who are they speculating with?
They are buying Bitcoin, hoping that somebody tomorrow will buy it for more.
Okay, but you're generating this Bitcoin, and then you can turn that Bitcoin into buy other things, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it does actually have value. So somebody is willing to pay for it.
Well, yeah, there is no doubt there is a market value to it, but the question is are we actually gaining something? When we build a bridge, we've built a physical asset. When you build a car or a cell phone, there's a physical asset. Bitcoin doesn't have that. The only real value you have is potentially transaction fees as part of the extending the blockchain. But we can do all the blockchain stuff. We can have all of that without using anywhere near the amount of energy that Bitcoin uses. It's not adding anything new to the economy.
So when you say you don't have anything physical, do you have to have something physical to have value?
Yeah, again, there's a distinction between, is there a market value? Yes, people are willing to spend money for it. Mm-hmm. But when we're evaluating whether this is a reasonable thing to do, I mean, people are willing to spend spend money on lots of things. But are they the best choice?
So is it the government's job to tell people they can or cannot spend money on the things they wish to choose to?
And as I mentioned to Senator Lummis, in a lot of cases, the government does exactly that. We have appliance efficiency standards.
That's very different. Appliance efficiency standards is different than saying you can or cannot spend your money on something, right?
In some ways, it's exactly.
I'm not telling you can't buy an appliance. I've got standards for how you produce them, but I'm not telling you can't buy one. And that seems to be what you're implying when you're talking about this Bitcoin being wasteful.
Yeah, I'm looking at it in this context of things like efficiency standards, and we do that all the time for whether it's environmental reasons, for pollution, whether it's national security reasons, for energy security. There's a long history of the government making judgments about these industries are wasteful, it's inappropriate, it does not put us in a good position going forward, and I think Bitcoin is one of them. It doesn't bring anything unique that we need.
Ms. Dentlinger, in Nebraska, NPPD, how do you look at different industries with regard to the rates you charge? Do you have any additional requirements on different industries? Do you treat them differently with regard to things like disclosure or anything like that? Is there an analogy here somewhere?
No, we're very agnostic to whatever the industry that's actually using the electricity. We have different rates for different customer classes, whether it's residential or commercial or industrial. But beyond that, we're not looking into the industry.
So who's your largest power user in the state of Nebraska?
Currently, Nucor Steel.
Okay, so Nucor Steel, and do you ask them to disclose anything with regard to their power generation?
No.
And do you actually charge them a separate rate because they're using so much power?
No, actually, again, because they're using so much and using it so regularly, the rate that they pay tends to be lower because it's a more efficient use of our assets.
So again, it's one of those things where as you're generating more, or you have a customer who is using more energy and it's more stable, as Nucor Steel is, you're actually charging them less because it actually is more efficient to generate that power.
Yeah, we're cost of use. Our rates are based on what it costs us to produce and deliver the electricity, and so that's reflected in our industrial rates.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I thank Senator Ricketts. I thank all of our witnesses. Of course, Nucor's emissions are captured by the EPA. Okay, that is a part of the public record what their emissions are. But in general, I would say that this has been one of the most informative hearings that the Congress has had in a long time about a subject that has just not had the attention which it needs. And I thank all of our witnesses for your great testimony today. And we're going to proceed on this subject because ultimately we just need to ensure the information is out there. Bitcoin is the first cryptocurrency, but it's not staying current with other assets like Ethereum. Its impacts are real, but its energy efficiency innovation isn't developing at the same time. Bitcoin is like if we still insisted on using whale oil to light our homes instead of energy efficient LEDs. That's the gap between proof of work that Bitcoin uses and other systems like proof of stake that Ethereum uses. One is 99% more energy efficient than the other. So it's just good to get that out there to make it clear that there are other ways of doing business. So we're talking today about unavoidable, untracked environmental impacts. We track emissions and impacts of mines, of cars, of power plants, but we've got a drain on our system, Bitcoin, that isn't accounted for. Other crypto assets like Ethereum produce value while using 99.9% less energy. So it's climate, it's air, it's noise, it's water, it's waste. These computer motherboards are harming Mother Earth. But we don't know the extent of the damage. We don't have anyone checking the work of crypto mining companies that argue they're helping the planet or the grid. And that's why the Crypto Asset Environmental Transparency Act is so important. And states like New York or Pennsylvania or Massachusetts or Nebraska are taking a case-by-case approach to this new power-sucking powerhouse industry. But we need a federal approach just so we have the information out there as to what the climactic impacts are. So the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee is the ideal forum to consider legislation which would do just that. They're unlikely to have this hearing over in the Banking Committee, the Financial Services Committee. This is our job. Our job is to look at these aspects of this new technology. I thank my colleagues for their participation in this hearing. I'm very grateful to our witnesses today. And before I adjourn, some housekeeping. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a variety of materials that include letters from stakeholders that relate to today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. And senators, all senators, will be allowed to submit written questions for the record through the close of business on March 14th. We will compile those questions and send them to the witnesses and ask each witness to reply to the senators by March 28th. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.